Welcome students, welcome faculty, welcome members of the community, and fans of WCMA. We're really happy that you're here. This is a really special occasion for us. I am not going to do an introduction. I am going to thank our speakers, Carrie Mae, Deborah, and Robin, for participating. But most importantly, I want to thank our staff. I want to thank the education staff who works tirelessly to put these events together. But I want to really single out two people without whom tonight would be impossible. One is our chief curator, John Stomberg, who was the in-house curator for Posing Beauty. In fact, it was John who, when an email flashed up about this project, was in my office in probably 10 seconds after he received it to say, we must do this show. And he was absolutely right. As usual, his instincts are impeccable. I also want to thank and congratulate Delila Scruggs. For those of you who don't know her, she graduated, received her PhD in art history from Harvard this June, but she started at WCMA a year before that as our first Mellon Curatorial Fellow for Diversity in the Arts. In the short, just over a year that she's been with us, I think it's fair to say that everyone on the staff, and certainly the colleagues she's made amongst the students and faculty, realize she's had a transformative impact on our campus. And we are so proud that this is the first project that she's worked on under John's mentorship, and we're just so thrilled that she's here at Williams. So I want to congratulate her especially and thank her for coming to Williams to be part of this community and sharing her knowledge and expertise with us. And now, oh yes. I also want to say that if you haven't registered for your spring courses, that Delila is teaching a history of African American art through the art history department. It's cross-listed with Africana Studies, and you'll be a very lucky person if you're fortunate enough to enroll. So please sign up for her course. And now I'd like to introduce John Stomberg, our wonderful chief curator.
The truth is, all three of our speakers this evening need no introduction in Williamstown. Especially on a Williams College stage. They have all had an ongoing relationship with the intellectual life on campus. Deborah Willis is the chair of the Department of Photography and Imaging at the Tisch School of the Arts at NYU and has an affiliated appointment as a university professor with the College of Arts and Sciences in Africana Studies. She has been the recipient of way too many prizes to name here today. But allow me to mention a few representative accolades. In 2005, she was the recipient of both a Guggenheim Fellowship and a Fletcher Fellowship. And in 2000, she was the MacArthur Fellow. In 1996, she had the wonderful anonymous Was a Woman Foundation Award. Further, Deborah is both a photographer herself and a scholar of the medium, actively showing her own photographs while racking up a daunting publications record, including the book on which this exhibition is based. I hope you all get a chance to see it. And Reflections in Black, a history of black photographers, 1840 to present. And this is just the tip of the iceberg of her publications. Picturing Us, African American Identity in Photography, and significant for all of us, the catalog that she did for a Williams College Museum of Art exhibition in 1989, Black Photographers Bear Witness, 100 Years of Social Protest, a really kind of important book in the field, I would really say. In her scholarship, Deborah has transformed the entire conversation about race and photography, and evolved methodology that combined visual culture and culture studies, high style and vernacular, in essence, the big picture. How do we come to know the world and what it is we're learning? She has led a new generation of scholars who owe her a great intellectual debt, and if her current rate of production is any indicator, she's just getting going. I would also like to say that along her path, Deborah has encountered many fantastic individuals, but of particular and lasting importance has been her relationship with Carrie Mae Weems. Carrie, too, has a long-standing relationship with the College Art Museum. In 2000, while a visiting professor at Williams, Carrie created the monumental Hampton Project, a work in which she stitched together historical and contemporary images with text and audio, creating an immersive environmental artwork that then traveled to several other museums around the country before coming into our permanent collection in 2004. We are also proud to have 5 prints from the Kitchen series. Like Deborah, Carrie has a list of accomplishments too long to rehearse here, but of special interest for us, she was just included in the Arts in Embassies program. How wonderful is it to think of Carrie's brilliant work participating in our national diplomatic efforts. She's also received an Anonymous Was a Woman Fellowship in 2007, a Paula Krasner grant, an NEA grant, a Lewis Comfort Tiffany grant, Skowhegan, and the list goes on. It's really, really amazing. And she's exhibited in countless, literally countless group shows, and sometimes as many as 10 one-person shows per year for the last 20 years. It would be hard to overestimate the weight of Carrie's vision today. She is simply one of the most consistently interesting and provocative makers of penetrating and arresting image in this turn of the century period. And now, to help broaden our discussion of Deborah's show and Carrie's work, we've invited photo historian Robin Kelsey to join us. Robin is the Shirley Carter Burden Professor of Photography and Director of Graduate Studies in the History of Art and Architecture Department at Harvard University. This year, he is also the Robert Sterling Clark Visiting Professor at Williams College, an appointment which marks his return to town as he was a Clark Fellow a few years ago and co-organized the Meaning of Photography, a symposium in 2005, and a best-selling publication the following year. His essay, Viewing the Archive, Timothy O'Sullivan's photographs from the Wheeler Survey, 1871 to 1874, which my students from last semester will remember, of course, appeared in Art Bulletin and won the prestigious Kingsley Porter Prize by the College Art Association. He is currently working on 2 separate book projects, Photography and Chance and Viewed with Suspicion, Photography in America, 1959 through 1976. Finally, I am thrilled to reintroduce my newest colleague at the museum, Dalila Scruggs, the Andrew W. Mellon Curatorial Fellow for Diversity in the Arts. Dalila finished her PhD at Harvard University last spring with her dissertation, The Love of Liberty Has Brought Us Here, the American Colonization Society and the Imaging of African American Settlers in Liberia. You get more points the longer your dissertation title is, you see. She works in fields of African American art and the art of African diasporas. At the museum, she has worked on bringing posing beauty to the Williams community, and her first exhibition for us opens next month, Who Can Dance? African Art and Gender. That is our panel. What we would like to do is ask a series of questions for our panelists to discuss. We have planned for time at the end of our dialogue to turn it over to questions from all of you as well. So, let's proceed. The last thing I wanted to say is I forgot to lift up Carrie Mae's great catalog of the Hampton Project, which includes an essay by, Deborah Willis, that was also here. So with all of that said, let's start. And it looks like I'll ask the first question. I think they're on by now.
This illustrious group.
Amazing group.
Extraordinary.
I should be sitting in the front. So first we want to give Deborah Willis a chance to discuss the impetus for the exhibition. Why beauty and why now? So,
I started the project possibly 12 years ago in terms of research, considering the ideas about beauty based on the fact that there was the discussion of beauty has been missing in the larger world. As a teacher, I was teaching images called The Black Body and the Lens, and I noticed that a number of my students were curious about why these images were missing in the history books. Why have in terms of how do we discuss beauty based on body image and the discussion with the larger community based on art and the sociological issues on beauty. So it started in many ways, and it's not like one project. One of my biggest concerns was that we now know how powerful the discussion of beauty is based on the silence of beauty, the silence of the images. There are well-known photographers within this exhibition that I did not know that they photographed Black subjects, and Black subjects they were also looked at the idea of beauty within posing the subject. I was also thinking about the idea of the phrase posing as a question, and also as the act of posing. So I entered in this discussion as a question with students, and one of my students also asked the question: Can a feminist wear red lipstick? Because they felt really uncomfortable being beautiful, and she's a white woman also. That how can I be beautiful and think about being an activist and a feminist? And so I thought that it's really important to open up this discussion about beauty, and then also to ask the questions that they're asking, because as we spoke earlier about this whole notion about feminism, there's now I know that there's a third wave feminism movement, and they're asking questions that have flipped the idea about how to embrace beauty without feeling objectified. So this discussion and this exhibition just kind of relates in many ways, and we can enter it in a number of ways in that way.
That's terrific. Would anybody else like to talk about beauty in the context of our show before we move on to other questions?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
But I think you should go next.
I'm really curious about the reintroduction of the term beauty, because even as soon as 10 years ago, nobody was really very comfortable using the term in the context of images or art, especially.
Well, there have been signs of a return. I think this show, though, is a wonderful moment for asking what beauty means at this moment. And I think it was interesting to hear you say, Deb, that your use of the term posing had in it this posing the question, because I think that comes through in the show so much. The open-endedness of it, the sense in which you're not closing it down, you're not turning it into some kind of didactic new program, but instead just raising the question through a very generously wide array of photographs. So what I'm saying is, if that was your message, I think it's coming through.
Great.
But it seems, it's Deb and I, of course, are very close. I mean, in a lot of ways, Deb is my best friend. She's my sister, my soul sister. And there are times when it's the only voice that I want to hear at 6 o'clock in the morning, which is when we often have conversations. I mean, they're very, very early in the morning, because we're always working and we're always up thinking and we're always struggling over a course of ideas. And for me, this exhibition, and not just this exhibition, but the position of this exhibition is critical, because it really speaks, I think, really to the question of the systematic denial of beauty towards a group of people. And that is really, for me, the genuine importance of the exhibition, that we're really dealing with the idea that a whole group of people have been misrepresented, underrepresented, and denied access to the term that we call beauty, because it really rubs up against a sort of classical idea or a westernized idea of the very concept of beauty. For the most part, a concept that has left out virtually everybody but a group of whites, for the most part. And so that in this sort of very elegant and very sophisticated way, I think this exhibition then really speaks really beautifully and really eloquently to to an ongoing threat and a systematic denial of a whole group of people, of millions of people all around the world. And I think that it's really fascinating because of that it raises that question, that we have to actually begin to recontextualize what this term means, and then how it's used, and how we look at it, and how we then apply it to not just to the body, and sort of ideal notions of shape and proportion and nose and eye and hair and color, right? But to the soul and to the spirit and to the mind. So that's really my interest in the exhibition.
It's you've brought up something that, in terms of ideas, like this cover image was selected by the designer of the book. I had other ideas for the cover, but this cover image has just generated a lot of memory for me, because in the 70s, this was the most popular poster in homes that across America, as well as in Jamaica. And when the show was in the art gallery in Hamilton, there were a lot of people from the Caribbean there, and everyone walked in, over the age of, 50, said, I remember that image, this image. And then also, there was someone also walked in and said, I used to babysit for that person. She was a model. And so the range of images, this type of image, where in sense of empowerment and the politics of shaving hair, a shaved head, hoop earrings, just kind of not looking into the camera, but having the camera and the viewer look at this subject, was just kind of a dialogue that happened, that continues to happen. And unfortunately, the photographer died last year, but a Jamaican photographer who everyone in Jamaica was excited about the cover, that a Jamaican woman that I never knew, that Susan Taylor, who was the director, the editor at Essence, was from Jamaica. Right. But the fact that she's on the cover of the book, and the stories that generate as people look at this image, and accepting the fact that it's a profile with a back. And so there's a way that where the gaze is kind of an interactive gaze with this image.
I guess I really appreciate your comments, and particularly this idea of like a history of denial in the representation of African Americans. And so I thought maybe we could go to the next slide. When John and I were thinking about what kinds of questions to ask, we were thinking that even though photography is a pretty young medium, this is a point where African Americans may have had a great deal of access to their own representation, ways of maybe overturning that systematic denial, perhaps. And I guess I was hoping that maybe you guys could comment a little bit more on whether you think that photography, in fact, has been an access point for African American representation, and if it's particularly critical to the study of African American identity.
Well, your selection in this group, this edited group, is wonderful, based on this notion of the profile. A number of people outside of, I studied photography in the 70s, and we looked at images, profiled images, as part of the profile of portraiture and painting. I know that there are a number of people who are looking at these profiled images differently now and using this as mugshot images, which I really find problematic. So I love the fact that you put the three of these images together and to interrogate it in a different way. The first image with Carrie Mae's reflection and response to the image, you became a scientific profile, says one thing about the object. And then W.B. Du Bois decided in 1900 to organize an exhibition called the Georgia Negro, and decided to include 360 photographs of profile and frontal images for the exposition, to show the idea of blacks as beautiful, as educated, and they were markers. They weren't identified in the exhibition, but they became markers for representing black culture. And so with the exhibition, because there were so many previous exhibitions and even at the same time as the Paris exposition, the images of blacks were distorted or stereotyped or seen within the concept of an object to ridicule. And so this exhibition, that he includes this unidentified subject, was representative of a young black woman who was a student in Georgia. But here she's stylish. She has earrings and she's wearing a popular dress, and her hair is styled. To Anthony Barbosa's 70s image of the actress model Pat Evans, and here the same experience with a profile, eyes closed, and he's embracing the fact by painting her skin black to have this opportunity to see the range of beauty, the bald head, the profile, and just creating this notion of how we can look at beauty and research it through the way you've organized this. Like we're researching this history of beauty from 3 different time periods and entering it from 3 different types of photographers.
Yeah. So, did you guys have any other thoughts about this kind of spectrum?
Yes, I think you did. Right?
All right, yes. I do, in fact. Well, I think that there was a moment, circa 1980, in which there was this turn to the archive, right, to the history of photography. And it was a moment, I think, largely marked by some disillusionment that the 60s had not led to the social revolutions that many imagined. And photography was kind of caught up in that disillusionment. And so I think there was a strong emphasis on the disciplinary nature of photography, of holding people in place, the scientific subject. And I think that just as we're having a sort of new moment for beauty, I think it is a moment in which we might want to retrieve some of the utopian impulses in photography. And I think Frederick Douglass is a great example. I mean, he had a lecture, Pictures in Progress, which is available online, at least one edition of it from the Library of Congress, in which he says that Daguerre was the greatest inventor of the 19th century because he had created this machine that would allow anyone to enter their image into history. And he said, as a black man, if he went to get his face painted in a portrait, it would be mediated by all that racism, but the camera didn't care. The camera was just representing everyone in the same way. And so by the time you get to Du Bois doesn't believe this. Du Bois thinks it matters who's behind the camera, right? And that's probably how we would see it now. But nonetheless, I think that aspect of photography, that here was this mechanical eye that didn't care in some sense, fundamentally didn't care, which isn't to understate all that goes into the apparatus, the way that it's culturally encoded and so forth. We know that. But there is a fundamental indifference to that the camera had that carried within it a kind of utopian possibility, which strikes me as being a part of what this show ultimately is about, that utopian possibility.
Really? Utopian? How
Yeah.
so? I mean, I think it's better to have a conversation.
Fair enough.
Yeah, it's a good question.
That's fine. I'm not saying...
What's the utopian possibility?
Yeah. By utopian possibility, I mean a certain aspiration. That is not necessarily a claim that you can reach this final state, but the idea of a form of self-fashioning, right, where you can make yourself in front of this machine that will give you that freedom in some sense by virtue of its indifference to who you are.
Right.
Yeah, that's really all.
Right. Except that, I mean, and it is a really interesting question, because the thing that really frightens me usually is when other people attempt to image me, because I know what photographs can actually do, and particularly in the wrong hands, or in unintended ways, or sometimes in preconceived ways. But that moment, that moment of how one interacts with this technology is absolutely critical. And even while I understand exactly what you're saying, that it offers up, it seems to offer up this extraordinary possibility. often that is absolutely undercut. And so if we actually look at the real history, for instance, of the subjecting of African Americans, for instance, in American photography, one would not, of course, find that utopian possibility, at least that would fall on my side. Do you know what I mean? It may be a utopian possibility for somebody else, you know, in terms of their own sort of construct, in a social construct and social, you know, and then necessity for a certain kind of way of imagining and looking at another group, at the other group. So I'm always sort of aware of it, and I'm always thinking about it, and that it offers up this incredible possibility, and it offers up incredible distortions simultaneously. And sometimes those distortions can be ones that you're very interested in, and that serve your purpose and serve your intent. But they are distortions nonetheless, because it is a machine that is in the hands of individuals. Right. You know, it doesn't operate on its own accord.
Yeah. And that's exactly what Du Bois did. I mean, he flipped the aspect of, he created this utopian body of images of black people. That he says that, okay, there's the stereotype, archetype, you know, terms of images, and then he created, okay, this is another set. And I'm going to stereotype these images of blacks who are, you know, dressed, who own homes, who
because he had
educated,
another kind of agenda.
Because he had the opposite agenda. So, he really believed that art was propaganda. You know, art could be used as propaganda. And this terms of the utopian image that he described in terms of blacks flipped it, and it was amazing because people who attended the exhibition. There are articles that are just fascinating because the black press in America, the black press covered the exhibition. The people who traveled on the ship was like Adam Clayton Powell Sr. was there, and Mary Church Terrell. So there were a number of people who attended the opening night, but the white press in America did not cover the exhibition. So trying to research that exhibition was really difficult, except for the French press. You know, they covered it. And so there were ways of blocking. The white press talked about the Midway and the Africans who were displayed in their recreated villages, but overlooked the aspect of what Du Bois did and tried to do with it.
You have this question, is photography is especially critical to the study of African American identity? You want to talk about that a bit?
Oh, you're asking me. Okay. Well, I
mean, right?
Let's see. I'm not sure. I think it is. I think it has something to do with the idea that if we go with Du Bois or somebody like Frantz Fanon, where the phenomena of always trying to reconcile an outside image is put with your self-image, then photography is a great way of trying to see how those two things come together, the image and the experience. And that's why I guess I was not sure which side of the debate I wanted to be on in terms of, is it a utopian experience when we particularly think of photography as a democratic medium where African Americans for the first time had access to photography, and there could be a Douglas moment where it's like, well, yeah, I get to have this camera, and even if it's constructed in a certain way, it's my construct. Or is it, on the other hand, the idea that as Du Bois, he was still invoking these mugshot poses. I know he's still using the profile and the frontal image. So can you deconstruct the master's house with the master's tools kind of question? Like if you're still using the same languages of photography, have you really gained access to your true identity or this true representation? So for me, that's a long way of answering. I think it is a really useful tool because of the ways in which you can really start to dissect the ways that identity is constructed through an image.
And can we carry that same question over to you? In your when you did this exhibition, you put this together, was there a sense of looking toward the potential for a utopian side of photography's role?
No, and it's funny, Robin said that, that I posed a lot of questions in the exhibition. I wanted to, it was not, I wanted to show that there was a belief, you know, that these subjects were in collaboration with the photographers. That even with the street photographers who just happened by to see something in this couple that they photographed or the group that they photographed, that he recognized that the subjects, when they walked out the house, they knew that they were, that was their moment.
Right.
You know, their moment of beauty, their moment of excitement, their moment of being desired, or they desired themselves. So that's kind of my moment with the exhibition when, and also selecting for the book. It was not something that I could actually identify, but there was something that happened emotionally with me as I was in archives, and also when I worked with some of the archivists and librarians, that when they heard the project, the title of the project, they said, oh, wow, let me show you this. This is this. And so it was fascinating to watch curators and librarians actually identify beauty for me. And I was saying, this is not, but they were thrilled that these are images that were not used. And the most important aspect for me was to recognize that they had a voice in cataloging these images and giving these images categories within their archive, but no one ever used any of the images. And so a lot of the images that they shared with me, they were excited about opening up the doors and having an opportunity to show it, as well as the Du Bois image. There was a clerk at the Library of Congress who said he was happy to see me looking at the photographs. I was there in the 70s, and they said these photographs did not exist. And the clerk who found the images said that they were on a shelf. He pulled them out so that this is like the next thing to process. And he said that he was just excited that someone recognized that this was something important to process and use. So he recognized the beauty of it and
Right.
and
the importance of them.
And the importance of the images.
From the Du Bois material?
Bois, right.
And all of this was all in one single box?
90 years they were on a shelf at the Library of Congress, waiting to be processed.
Get to the archives.
I know, absolutely.
That's fantastic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Are we comfortable moving on?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Okay. So in your show, Deborah, you've selected from a wide variety of photography types, fashion and news and art and documentary and portraiture, and all of these shape our understandings of beauty in different ways. So to what degree do the different contexts of these multiple and different types of photography aid and generate their own kind of meaning and the way meaning is understood?
Mm-hmm. Well, just thinking about politics of moments like the 30s, this photograph.
Oh, yes.
Go to the next one. The photograph by Winans, Theodore Winans. It's photographed in Louisiana, Dixie Bells. So this is the 30s. This is two sisters with a package, a Sunday afternoon. The moment where we also recognize that blacks could not walk on the same street with whites or even look face to face with white men or women and sometimes children. And that this is a photographer who the young girls are recognizing that they're looking directly at the photographer. They're also still holding their packages, but the photographer saw something in these two young girls, their beauty. And I saw that photograph at the Ogden Museum. I just happened to see it. It was on display, and said, wow, their hats, the way their hats were tilted. There was a cradle. I mean, not only their faces, but the way that she's cradling the package is something special. And there was a moment for me that at the time, politically, I thought it was just an important photograph. The fact that they're wearing jewelry, you know, there are beads and wire, so there are aspects of it, to Lauren Kelly's, you know, picking with the Afro pick and the fist on the pick. You know, this image just creates a crown of glory, a crown of beauty in terms of what it meant to empower yourself with hair in that moment, with the hair of the 90s to the hair of the 60s, and she's like kind of using those moments. And as art imitates life in terms of the blaxploitation films, the photograph here of Barboza, where, you know, young men and women are wearing, you know, boots and hot pants and colorful suits, so they're like the dandies of the 70s. So the energy of street photography to also, as we say, some celebrities are there, like Jean-Michel, that this is a moment where we see a young man who was not a famous artist at the time, but just, you know, just a stylized guy of the East Village, and that he's captured with this kind of really big brim hat. So hats are really significant. We see hats with men, we see hats with women, we see fashion, and see this kind of energy where Lyle Ashton Harris is responding to the experience to be Miss America, you had to be white. So he has white face with the American flag wrapped around the subject. So there's all of these moments of politics and fashion and beauty going on at the same time.
And to what degree is it the context, i.e. art, news, fashion, and so forth, that shapes the way beauty is constructed? Or do you think that the context does, in fact, change the way we understand beauty from one to another? If we're in a gallery, if we're thumbing through a magazine, if we're looking at a newspaper, are those different contexts, in fact, shaping and addressing beauty in different ways?
Yes. Yes, of course, they do. I was actually talking to a group of students about this yesterday. You know, I mean, the thing that interests me about, for instance, you know, this set of photographs that we're looking at, I mean, you know, we're talking so much, you know, about a certain kind of downbeat style, right? I mean, it's, you know, it's not, it's, you know, it's like, you know, it's like, I mean, they're so hip. I mean, this Barboza photograph is so, it's so cool. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I want those shoes, I want that, you know, I want those pants, I want my hair to look like that. I mean, they're so hip. Do you know what I mean? And the thing, and so it speaks to you on so many other levels about style, about personal style and cultural style, you know, and cultural style references and period references. I mean, it seems to me that in part that's sort of the real beauty, of looking at these photographs is that it's so much about very specific historical moments when people asserted themselves in very specific ways. And that there's something that is about something that starts to get closer to the truth of who these people are in their context, in their lives, in their style, in their embrace of themselves. That's really important. And it's the one thing that we don't really see in fashion magazines, right? Because in fashion magazines, as much as I love looking at fashion, I love looking at those things, it's also absolutely about gloss, right? And about separating the personal and the real and those things that have odor and funk and must to them, you know, to the gloss that keeps you really on the surface of the thing, keeps you simply desiring, perhaps, desiring to consume that thing. As opposed to perhaps being evolving from out of the thing, coming out of the thing, that it actually represents much more of who you are. This Barboza photograph represents something that I know, something that I understand, something that I've lived through, a way that I acted in the world, that it has to do with the truth of self, or something that is more aligned with the truth than one might see again in Vogue or in Hoppers or wherever you look.
And does that change with art photography as well?
Oh, I think so. I think so. But I think that we are actually we're looking at a sort of cross between art and
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you can
journalism,
even
aren't
make
we?
that, yeah. Right.
Yes,
Right.
yes. But I think that, it seems to me that the thing that becomes important, certainly in my own making, is how close to the truth of the question can I rub up against. And the closer I think that I can get to that thing, which is often far messier than I'd like to think, but is true, is to the extent that I think that I've arrived at something that is meaningful. And in that way, you achieve a certain kind of loveliness and a certain kind of beauty, even when it's painful to witness, when it's painful to make. No?
Especially in your work, yes. I see that, especially in your work.
What do you think?
I think having stated my notion of a utopian germ in photography, I will dialectically move across to the opposite position, which is to say that I think one of the things that's so valuable about the crossing of all those genres in the show is that it makes the viewer so keenly aware of the conditions of self-representation, the different power positions that are involved, the constraints that everyone is under. And as you shift from genre to genre, those positions shift, the subject shifts its relationship to the powers in play. And that, I think, is one of the most provocative things about the exhibition. And I think, for me, I mean, if there is something redemptive, in the coolness, right? The capacity, in some sense, to find through a kind of style, a kind of pose, a kind of stance in the world, a kind of attitude, to find a way through whatever blockages and constraints there are placed, right? And that's the moment of exhilaration. And there are lots of moments in the show, I think, where you feel that exhilaration, right? Where, as you say, where people have not been allowed access to this thing, and they're going to find their way anyway, right? And that's great, but it's balanced in the show. It's balanced in the show with work that reminds us so strongly of those constraints, of the difficulty. So.
Leela?
Ask
a question.
Okay, so do you want to
Yes.
move to the next question? Okay, great. This question is specifically for the artist Carrie Mae Weems.
Good thing she's here.
Yeah. As a real fan of your work, I wanted to ask you, what does it mean to you to put yourself as the subject of your photography, of your practice, in the way that you do? For example, in this work, I looked and looked to see what so terrified you.
I actually spend like an enormous amount of time alone. And I really started using myself. I started using myself because there was nobody else around that looked like me. In the communities that I lived in, for instance, I made Kitchen Table in Northampton. I didn't know any other black women in the area, not really. So I started actually working with myself almost out of necessity, because I knew that something that I needed to represent, something that was not being represented, I needed to make that thing, and I needed to make that thing sometimes in the middle of the night, or very early in the morning, or under arduous circumstances, or because I was like out on the road and I needed a figure that could stand in for me. Right. And then, but the thing that's really amazing to me about work and about this act of photographing, this act of making these particular kinds of photographs, is that photography really tells me actually what I'm doing. It usually tells me what I'm doing much later. Like even when I think that I really know what I'm up to, it really informs me. Like, for instance, I didn't know that I was completely in love with architecture until much later on, right? After hundreds and hundreds of photographs with buildings, but I didn't know that I was in love with architecture, and that I was really trying to understand something about the power of architecture and how architecture is really used in the society, right? Though I'm looking at it, I'm writing about it, but I didn't really understand my deep love for architecture. You know, I didn't understand that actually what I was doing, or what I've been doing for the last, 30, 40 years really, is this sort of act of performing. You know, that I'm very interested in the act of performance and of living through a certain set of circumstances with my skin, and trying to stand in for many, many, many other kinds of experiences that are usually much bigger than myself. You know, so I'm sort of a reference for something. My photographic persona is really a muse for me, and she operates for me as a kind of guide into other situations and circumstances that Carrie usually chooses not to go in, you know? And so it's really kind of it's a very interesting thing. She really does function as a kind of alter ego. And so that's the way I've used it for a very long time. And she's becoming very interesting to me as a clear persona that is very distinct from myself and very useful.
Wow. I mean, two things really stand out for me when you say that kind of thing. First of all, the idea that isolation was what created this huge way of reflecting on a universal theme is kind of scary. And if you think about that as a human condition, that's where you find your connection to everybody is by isolating. But also the idea, and maybe I'm kind of stepping on Robin's toes a little bit in the sense that the idea that photography is a way of helping you examine your unconscious, like discovering that you like something by taking all these pictures of you, and realizing that actually in the background is the architecture that's really that interesting thing.
Yes.
I think that's also pretty fascinating.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so I have one more question, a kind of follow-up question. This one's not just for you. No, I'd really like you to answer it, but everybody on the panel.
We can't answer the question about Carrie's work?
She's already in the third person. I think we need to tread lightly.
So if I could have the next slide.
But before you leave that
Sure.
one, I'd like to talk about
sorry, go ahead.
this aspect of desire, that I see in this photograph. I love the reflective notion of the mirror, but I also love the designing of the dress. That you use the quilt pattern from, the 19th century or earlier.
Yeah.
You also have, like a bodice. Your body is part of this experience of desire. So you see the beauty in there. But the term of entitling this image is part of this, your hairstyle. Everything is about what Du Bois was putting up with that Paris Exposition of 1900. So he's basically asking the same question that you presented here. And so I'm just curious about how you put this body together. The dress and designing that dress, and thinking about women and work and
Yeah. I actually made this dress. I made it and for another project, a kind of other project. No, that's not really true. I actually made it for this project, but it was for the Louisiana project, really, and which was a really interesting thing to do. I mean, it was a really interesting project to work on because there was so much stuff about New Orleans is such a strange place, and all that sort of cultural history that operates there, and the way in which, the depth of the system there. I mean, it's a really deep cultural system and caste system. And so I was thinking a great deal about that. I did a lot of photographs about masks and a whole series around masks, a whole series around a carnival that had taken place in New Orleans. But but on another level, Deb, I mean, I think, there are all of these things about looking, I've used mirrors a lot, reflecting me, reflecting you, reflecting us. There's the same in kitchen table. There's always these ideas about these sort of multiple reflections that are going on. But I think the simplest answer really has to do with knowing that no matter what, I'm always I'm pushing against something. You know, that I'm asking a very deep question about what is consistently denied me, denied us. And when I say me, I usually really mean you, me, and us together. What is denied us? Not just Black women, not just white men, but us together. What is denied us consistently when our humanity is desecrated, when it's stepped on, when it's walked on? And it doesn't simply mean me. It means that there's something that's lowered about all of us when we are stepping on one another's humanity. Something is really broken there. And for me, I wanted to explore, and I continue to explore, this thing that is broken in that space through a sort of system of reflections.
Thank you.
Robin, you had? No?
No, sounds good.
You don't have anything to say. I think you have much to say.
I think we should probably make this the last question, or should we open up now?
See, already, this is the problem with panels, right? You know, there are all these like amazing, you could talk to Deb for like 2 hours alone, right?
Absolutely. So
You know?
I think what we'd like to do is we're going to turn it over to questions in just a moment, but Dalil, we ask your last question.
Yeah, can we just skip to the next slide then?
Absolutely. This one?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So as we're talking about particularly inserting yourself into the role of the photographic subject as well as being a photographer, when I look at Renee Cox's work, particularly this one, I'm wondering about the kind of perils and payoffs of inserting yourself in a photograph, particularly when you become a sexual object. And for me, I was really thinking about a book by Maryse Condé, I might be mispronouncing it, but she has this great line in a book called Hera Makanon, which says there's a kind of voluptuousness in being an object. And I thought maybe as a last question, maybe we could talk a little bit about what are the perils and payoffs of being an object, particularly as an artist, inserting yourself in that work, but also as thinking about the delectation, I guess, of this object in the photograph. Hopefully that's a good question now.
Harvard, huh?
Yeah, okay, so it sucks. It sucks. Okay, we can just open it up to the group. It's okay. We can skip it.
Robin, you want to answer that one?
You think I'm responsible for this?
You're responsible for that. You're responsible for that.
Dalila taught me more than I taught her. Well, one thing I would say is that it always struck me in that first wave feminist moment, the notion of being objectified, of turned into an object. It was interesting that that meant powerlessness. I mean, it was kind of interesting just because the notion that objects are powerless is kind of interesting. Because there's a way in which right now, with all the thinking we do about object theory and so forth, and the lives of objects, giving them biographies and so forth, I think we tend to think of objects, and I've moved away from right now from the strictly feminist issue, but we think about objects as having a kind of power over us, right? And that in and of itself, I think, means that when one situates oneself, positions oneself, poses as an object, it means something different now than it did, 20, 30 years ago. I mean, but I don't know.
I'm working right now on this new, we're calling it a song cycle. I think we're calling it an opera, but that was a little too big for us. It's a song cycle now. And on the life of Sarah Bartman, the Hottentot Venus, which Deborah, too, has worked on tremendously. And it's been a really very interesting process working on her. I haven't really thought about her in a serious way for a number of years. I mean, I started doing work around her, 35 years ago or something like that, when Sandra Gilman or Stephen Jay Gould had just come out with his Pink Flamingo something or other. And then Sandra Gilman did his sort of seminal work, Difference in Pathology, which is really kind of an amazing book, and that spurred all kinds of inquiry into the life of this woman. And so I started working with a group of artists, the author, Rachel Holmes from London, white South African composer who's amazing, Philip Miller, who's been working with William Kentridge for a really long time. And we actually just came together for the first time last week in Syracuse, for the first time really to gather, to look at the songs, to look at the music, to hear them, to write, and to look at her. And the thing that was really important about what I saw about her and what I kept saying that we needed to have was that at that moment, she was only simply a flat, two-dimensional object on a page, and that I had yet to see anybody deal with her in a complex way, in some ways outside of one of the images that you made of her, that really sort of challenged our notions of her. And the thing that was missing, the thing that profoundly that was missing was that she had absolutely no agency of her own.
Right.
And no claim to agency on her own. And it seems to me that, the peril is when you give up the agency of your own critical analysis of what you're doing. Do you know what I mean? And so when the intent is simply to turn yourself back into the object, and to have no sort of control over it, there's really nothing voluptuous in that. The voluptuousness comes when you have an agency to say, yeah.
I think that's what she does with that.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what, because that's not really objects. That is really being really in control of your own subjectness and understanding all of the contradictions that come along with being a subject and object simultaneously. Right? And the sort of dynamic play between those things. And that's, I think, also really interesting about what happens in this exhibition that Deb has curated. That there is all of this amazing sense of play. There's this really beautiful, beautiful Andalusian saying, and it is that within seriousness, there's very little room for play. But within play, there's tremendous room for seriousness. And so you just have these really wonderful, wonderful, wonderful moments of people who are really in many ways in control of themselves and who are finally willing to play with themselves in that way that you can only do when you are finally comfortable being in your skin.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's a great
That
conclusion.
seems like a perfect moment to turn it over to some questions.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you. So, yes.
Thank you. This was a really fascinating conversation. I wanted to ask, because a lot of all the conversation has been about the idea of beauty as a matter of sort of physical representation, self-representation of the body of a person, everything like that. And as you said, that there are other sort of human qualities that go along with that. But I was actually wondering if anyone could speak to the question of how the representation of Black beauty actually puts pressure on the medium itself. And I was thinking when you said we're talking about the utopian idea of the camera, that the camera just sees. And I appreciate that point. I think that's one of the kind of lost ideas behind modernism is the utopian impulse.
Right.
And photography is sort of crucial to that. But it made me think of, I don't know if I obviously spend too much time on the internet, but about a year ago, people discovered that the web cameras on certain Dell computers or something, there was this meme that went around about Dell computers are racist because they couldn't identify Black faces.
That's hilarious. It was calibrated for white skin.
The question of how posing beauty in terms of the subject also intersects with this idea of beauty in terms of the medium.
Right.
And the sort of even technical sort of conditions of understanding of beauty within photography itself. So I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Well, I'll just say this tiny one thing before I turn it over to you, because I think that one of the things that's really sort of fascinating about the way in which photography itself developed, and the systems of photography, as Deb knows, developed around the zone system. Mm-hmm. It developed around a system of what made white people look best, which is really kind of extraordinary. It was real. I mean, it was called Zone 5. Do you know what I mean? Where does and so encoded in the medium actually are these ideas that are really predicated on race, and then there are sort of amazing sort of young Japanese designers who came along in the 50s who talked about the use of dark light. The use of dark light in order to begin to fashion another kind of imagery that looked at the darker subject. And then people like Roy DiCarava, who came along with, black aesthetics, a kind of system and developed a kind of medium that, that allowed for this exquisite articulation of dark skin. The same thing has happened in India in various places. So this is absolutely very, very true. Okay, so you, yes.
But I mean, there does become this question of the black body and the pressure on even our aesthetic understanding of the media, and not even just the technical aspect.
I guess I just wanted to make a historical point that I think Du Bois, and I think it's the propaganda essay, makes the point. He says, I wish there were more black photographers precisely because they would be able to calibrate their photography in a way that would accent black skin better. So this has been on the mind of people for a long time.
Well, I'm working on a small book. It's called Blondes and the Madmen Who Made Them. And I'm really having a lot of fun with it. It's, I don't, Deb can turn out a book like a month. It takes me like years.
Everybody thinks that. It sits at the publishers for 20 years. Venus was at the publisher for 12 years.
Wow.
12 years to convince a publisher to, it's okay to push it out. It's okay. It's okay. So I know it's funny when people say that.
That's true.
So,
No, that's really
I'm
true.
a little sensitive about that.
Yes. But she is extremely prolific.
She is prolific.
And there was one morning that, we got up and we talked about a book, and about 2 months later, Deb had it finished and I was still writing the first paragraph. What could I possibly, so I have, but nothing but respect.
But I think Carrie answered your question wonderfully about the zone system, and it's something that no one talks about or writes about. I think you should write about that. Write about that.
I mean, there is desire in the camera, right? It's a desire for something particular, it's true, right?
Yeah.
So when you start thinking about opening up new possibilities of beauty, it does call into question the medium and whether it can deliver that, right? Whether it's equipped to deliver that. I mean, you used the expression from Alan Trachtenberg in your wonderful introduction about it being a theater of desire, and of course, cameras are designed precisely to give us a kind of theatrical space, right? Which is very much exploited in this exhibition.
Yes.
I wanted to ask about the tension between the way this exhibition makes visible and viable the work of a group of artists looking at African American culture and the way collecting practices of institutions have begun to change recently, and look at the way that the sort of narrative of art history that we've had for the past 100 years has been politically charged and racially charged, and this tension I see between contemporary African American artists trying to work in the quote-unquote post-Black world, and whether you guys can talk about that idea and that tension.
Well, I find it difficult to understand what it means about post-Black, so I can't really follow that one. But I think that it's really, I'm serious, that post-Black is not a reality to me. I think it's more of a term that people like to throw out, but no one knows what it means. So tell me what you think about what post-Black is.
I found it really interesting looking at this show and looking at things that have been going on the past year, the way a lot of major institutions have begun to collect contemporary African American artists, and the way there have been culturally specific institutions that also look at America versus the African diaspora and bring that to the New York art world and kind of this East Coast culture that we have.
Well, I think that I think that Williams has been actively seeking and looking to explore and expand their collections. So the activity that a number of younger artists are asking questions about history, and they're using the archive, and they're also reflecting on their own experiences. So I think that's what is exciting curators today. Like there are a number of curators who are kind of like have the pulse of what's going on in contemporary or just this era now of young artists working, and artists from my generation who are working and reflecting on stories. And I think that the curators are battling now with their board of trustees, because these are stories that have not been collected before. And so we began to think about, they're opening up the doors now. And I think that that's what's happening with the curators today. But I think that the trustees are now, what I've experienced from people that I've met and talked to, they're still trying to learn about how to accept some of the new art that's explored today. There is work, I'm trying to think of this work that's going on now with the type of work that you're creating that's using video. And video is part of the storytelling and the narrative of placing this history. And that's why I totally don't understand why the term post-Black still is passing through, because we are still in existence. This Black presence is still very heavily in existence.
But Deb put together a conference a couple of years ago. We were all down in Miami. And there are many, this question that you raised is actually a really interesting one. We were all down in Miami, and we were looking at all the young artists, work in the room. They're like, they're smart, they're talented, they're handsome, and I thought, would it be interesting to have like a conversation, right? Deborah and I start talking about having a conversation with these young artists. Am I standing in your way? Am I standing in your way? Have I laid the path, or do you feel like you need to step over me or around me in order to get to what it is that you need to get to? And I meant that in many, 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 many ways along a number of different parallel tracks. But I was at this dinner party the other night, and I go to like a lot of things. I'm invited to like a lot of things in New York City, right? We're like invited to a lot of things, and invariably, like I'm like the only sister in the whole place. Like I might go to like MoMA for like an important event. There are like 300 like major people in the room dealing with contemporary art photography, and I'm like the only sister in the room, and I'm the only person willing to raise some of the difficult questions about what museums are or are not doing, or to raise questions about that shit at all, because everybody is afraid that maybe if they raise certain kinds of questions, that maybe they won't be working with their colleagues next month. Maybe they won't get their show through. Maybe they won't get that acquisition that they want. Maybe, do you know what I mean? I mean, this stuff, this way in which people, I think, conform to norms and don't even see that I'm like the only sister in the room as a problem is enormous. Now, I know that there are things that are changing, and I really salute a lot of the work that young people are doing, but it is definitely not a post-Black anything. Do you know what I mean? By no means. I mean, I think that really what this sort of post-Black sort of tries to get to is that, maybe we can get rid of this sort of debate and this discussion about race and move on to something else. Right. Maybe we can pretend actually that it really doesn't matter, that we've actually made like significant sort of like breakthrough, But the idea, for instance, that the Tea Party can like gain so much incredible momentum, against this man, this sort of referendum on Obama is very much about, we have not moved very far. And I think that the art world very much reflects that, as much as it pains me to say this. You know, I think that there are really some great problems, and I think we can all sort of speak to this. But one of the things that I've been doing is just going and standing in front of them. You know? And it's not because my work may be there, but that's really not the point. The issue is really sort of far larger. You know? Systematically, what's taught, what you're taught here, how you're taught here matters. What's collected and what's not collected matters. Who sells and who doesn't sell matters. At what price point they sell and they don't sell matters. Right? I decided that I was going to walk over to John Baldessari the other day and to Matthew Barney and a couple of the boys who I do like, to say hello and to shake their hands, and to tell them, thank you for what you do and congratulations on your upcoming show. They had no idea who the fuck I was. None whatsoever, right? None. And didn't need to know. Didn't need to know. From their vantage point, didn't necessarily need to know. And I thought that was really fascinating. But I absolutely need to know who they are. And you don't necessarily need to know who Black artists are. You're not going to actually be reprimanded in class if you don't know who Deb Willis is.
Yes, you will.
Which is really kind of...
Just for the record.
I mean...
This is your instructor
But you understand what I'm
Yeah,
saying, right? I mean, I think that this is really a problem. This is really a problem. And it's something that I'm still thinking about, and I think that we have to really continue to wage war around that this really matters, and that this idea that we are distanced from the notion of invention is a serious problem. That we have no real contribution in the field is a part of the reason that we are systematically denied, I think, serious access to all levels of what goes on in the art world. But it's a very privileged and it's a very white space for the most part. So that's
let me just follow up in the end, because your question is important. When I was an undergraduate student, it was probably your age when I started my first paper on Black photographers.
Yes.
And I asked the question of my professor, where are the Black photographers? I knew of Gordon Parks and Roy DeCarava only because of their 2 books. And she said, I don't know, go ahead and do a research paper, which ended up, I'm probably your age at the time. I'm in art school. I've never written an extensive paper about a project, but I actually sat in the library at Temple University and went to the newspapers, and because of segregation, they had the colored photographers asterisk in all of the directories. So I turned pages and I looked at newspapers, I looked at microfilm, but it started with an undergraduate question. I would never think that it's 30 some odd years, almost 40 years later, I'm still working on the same project, that same first question. And so your question, and all of you who are in undergraduate classes, could be your lifelong project,
Yes.
And that's something that, keep that in mind, and that's the important aspect of it. So thank you for your question.
Perfect.
I think that seems like a great place to wrap up. Yes? Okay. True. Thank you very much, everybody. Deborah, thank you. That was absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much. Carrie, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.